Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And good morning. I'm Julie. I'm the founder of Apuri Solutions, which is a HR consultancy and coaching service. I'm a chartered fellow for the CIPD and also an accredited coach. So I work with small and medium-sized businesses who are seeking to outsource their HR or need a bit of extra support. And in terms of the HR support that I offer, it's anything from day-to-day to strategic. But for me, it's about providing people solutions. And as a leadership coach, I work to empower individuals and teams so that they can achieve their goals using a variety of methods, including NLP and motivational analysis. So as Christina said, for me, it's about empowering and enabling businesses and individuals to achieve what it is that they're wanting to achieve, whether that's through HR or through coaching. Christina, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, sure. So again, good morning, everybody. So I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, which is a multi-award winning GDPR or data protection consultancy. I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses, including charities, and I really like to work with them because I love to see them thrive. So that's why I gravitate towards them. I tend to have a hands-on practical approach with my client, and I tailored the solution in proportionate to their size and complexity. And so I help my clients navigate the intricacy of GDPR because it's not black and white, it's a variety of shades of grey. And I do that primarily by educating them on the regulation and how to apply to their environment, because knowledge is power. That also then in turn enables them to operate with a high-performing culture, which then fuels their business growth. So for me, it's all about educating, empowering, and enabling.
So when we're thinking about new starters, we've collated all of this paperwork possibly on the day they started or beforehand. But when should a new starter have access to the systems?
Okay, well, I would say certainly not before the employment start date. So even if they sign the contract, but they're not yet started. So in theory, they're not yet employee. Now, if you're not allowing staff to use their own devices, then you should wait until the company has provided them with a device. So then they can have access to the system and by default to the data that it's within that system, again, giving them, a role-based access. If, on the other hand, the organization is allowing staff to use their own devices, before you give them access to any system, you want to make sure that they have read and understood the organization bring your own device policy. And this is really, really important because I know that some organizations are keen to give new starter access to the LMS or other training platform so that it can carry out some initial training before the actual start and so shorten the induction period. And on the surface, this might look proactive. But while they're doing this, you're using their personal email address for a starter, because they haven't got yet a company email address. Whatever data you're sending to their personal email address, then it falls outside of the employer, who's the controller, infrastructure. And what we got to remember is that the controller is responsible for the end-to-end journey of the data. So this means that if the data is on a system that, say, the employee or the new starter's device, that it's outside of the control environment of the controller, but the employer is still responsible and accountable for that data. So this is where I would tread with caution, and my advice would be only once the employee started, because in the long run, it doesn't make you more productive. It actually exposes you to higher risk data breaches and complaints, and potentially even lawsuits. So that is what you, from a GDPR, what you should consider if you want to allow employee to have access before they start. But what about from an employment legislation perspective, Julie? Is there anything there that the organization should consider in terms of allowing new starters access to the system prior to actually the commence date?
So I think there's a couple of things actually, and for me, we've got to consider that if we're opening up the access and saying, actually, this is fine for you to email things to your personal account because the organization has done that first, we may start to see a culture coming through where we've already demonstrated that it's fine to share company data with personal email accounts. So you can see that there's a slight shift in culture. There's also the thought process, and I remember when it came in as a really strong thing to do, of giving people the option to start their induction process early so that they were up and running a lot quicker. But you might have someone who's already working. They're closing out their previous job, trying to get that all finished, and then suddenly have all the pressure of a new job. The employment contract hasn't started yet, but you're all of a sudden expecting them to do 10, 20 hours, 30 hours of work without paying them because they haven't started. But you're going to have that expectation. And what happens if they don't do that? What happens if there's because we all love quizzes, don't we? When we're doing learning, it's a good matrix for whether someone's paid attention, whether we can tick in a box that they've done the training satisfactorily. But what happens if you've got a new starter that's not being paid, that's finishing out their previous role, probably a bit stressed about joining a new organisation, and then fails a question, and they're not really sure about the company culture, what's acceptable, etc. That can make them incredibly nervous about joining the business. Let alone the fact that, of course, we're not paying even national minimum wage to them, and we're expecting them to work, or giving them any benefits or time off, etc. Not that I have a strong viewpoint on this, but but it's those kind of things that actually we need to consider, because I certainly know when I've moved employment, I'm madly trying to get everything in a place that I can hand it over. So then suddenly going, right, well, I need to start learning all of this as well. That's an awful lot for me to consider and manage, rather than thinking, right, well, I'm going to have a week off between jobs. I'm going to down tools, relax, be refreshed, rather than I'm actually going to start my new job so stressed because I haven't done the 10 hours that's expected of me to do the induction. So I think there's not necessarily there is the legal perspective, I think, from the minimum wage, etc. But it's also about the culture and expectations, and this is you setting your scene for for the new person coming in. And my viewpoint on it is, would that then transpire to be, well, it's a demanding business. They're expecting an awful lot from me and I haven't even started. And potentially the pressure of, I don't pass because I don't know my manager yet. I don't know how they're going to react. It might not set them on the right foot. But in terms of all of this, but also, Christina, what consideration should be given to them accessing data?
So as I mentioned earlier, access should be on a need-to-know basis. So in other words, it should be role-based. So when you are bringing in a new starter, so access to any data, to any system should be based on the role that they're going to be fulfilling. But I would also go a step further. And so not only determine whether it's base role, but also it's whether it's part of the role they just need to view the data or whether they need to edit the data. And so restrict the access even further in that respect. But the other things to consider is also align provision or have a process that allows the change of access in based on role changes. So if someone's moved from one department to another, if it gets promoted or demoted in some cases, you might have temporary cover. So you need to have a robust approval system for access, for data access, that capture the justification of why the access is required. And so everything should be clearly documented from a GDPR perspective, because it's the principle of accountability, but also think of audit trail, clear process ownership. You can then also, if someone questions it, you can then, or complaints, you can then sort of have your justifications ready. You have your ammunitions, if you want, to fight your corner. But the other thing as part of your process, your access process, is should review those access rights periodically, because things change in an organization, system change, they get updated, they get changed, swapped with another one, etc. Or you might need to have some temporary measure put in place. This reminds me of a case that happened with the NHS, and I can't remember which NHS it was, but basically this happened during COVID, where, because obviously people were working remotely, so a team of staff, they created a WhatsApp so that they communicate with each other and obviously share certain patient data, and then later on after COVID, so this was supposed to be a temporary communication tool. And then after COVID, they continue using these, and then someone else who added to the group. But this additional person as part of their role, they were not really authorized to see the data that was being shared in the group. So this was a data breach for a starter, but this goes to demonstrate the importance of having a clear process access authorization that is robust, that has its justification, so that instances like these or incidents like these do not happen. And you don't have staff going off on by themselves and creating communication tools without going through that proper process of authorization. Because remember what I said earlier, the controller, so the employer, is responsible and accountable for the data, even if it's outside the system of the employer. By doing that, the employee is putting the employer at risk, but also the employer then is accountable for any potential lawsuits or data breaches. So it's quite important that any organization has that nailed down.
Christina, I think that's a great point as well about people moving internally.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time I've seen, they've just moved, so we don't even need to consider the fact that they need to stop having access to this information and start having to this. It's much more of a case of, they can just have access to even more information. But of course, they don't need that. And what can happen with that is that instead of them following the right processes to request information, oh, well, I'll just have a quick look. I'll just look into this information. Previously, an organisation where I worked, we had payroll and HR as one team. And so payroll could see a lot of information. We went through and separated the two so that actually the only information that payroll could see was information that was relevant to that team, rather than seeing everyone's history, everything else that we had on file that's not relevant. But even in situations like that, you need to think about who has access to that information, and how sensitive it is and how appropriate it is to be able to access it. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think that's such a relevant point.
Yes, I mean, when I used to work at EDS, we had a really robust process for granting access to various areas of the system. We had SAP, which is quite complex, but you as the employee, if you needed additional access to the system, you would submit a request, which would then go to IT. IT would then go through the process, going through with your manager to really capture the justification of why the access was needed. And in some cases, it needed to go above your manager for approval, depending on what it was. So it was quite robust. You wouldn't just get access just like that. It would take at least a few days for that to come round, and then IT would then grant it if it went through the correct level of approval and it was approved. I mean, that was a large organization, so they had to have this really red tape kind of process. But I'm not saying it has to be that complicated, but you do need to have something in place so that access is not just given nilly-willy at every turn. Yes. I just wanted to remind our audience to please click the follow button to avoid missing any future episodes. If you would like to get in touch with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for CVG Solutions. Alternatively, you can email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk.